You used to be the good one. The one who never raised her voice, never picked the fight, never made anyone uncomfortable at dinner. The one who always understood, always forgave, always adjusted first. And then one day quietly you said no. No big speech. No dramatic exit. Just one small plain no. And the room went cold. Someone who has known you for 20 years looked at you like you were a stranger standing in a familiar body. Not because you did anything cruel. Not because you raised your voice or broke a single rule of decency. Because you stopped playing a role you never actually chose for yourself. Here is the truth almost no one says out loud. Disappointing people is not a character flaw. It is evidence. Proof that you stopped living for their approval and started living from somewhere real inside you. And that is exactly what this video is going to show you, piece by piece, starting with the room where the temperature changed. The psychologist Carl Jung had a precise word for the role you were playing in that room, and in every room before it. He called it the persona, the mask a person builds so the group will accept them, the good daughter, the easy friend, the one who never complains, never asks, never needs. Think of the persona like a work uniform, useful in the specific place it belongs, useless and even a little strange anywhere else. A uniform makes sense on a factory floor. It stops making sense the moment you're still wearing it to bed, to dinner, to the one place you're supposed to finally take it off. Jung was clear that the persona is not exactly fake. It is a compromise, a kind of social contract, between who you actually are underneath and what the people around you are willing to tolerate. A compromise is supposed to be temporary, situational, something you put on for a meeting and take off at home. But somewhere along the way, for most of the people watching this right now, that compromise stopped being a costume. It became the only self anyone was allowed to see. You stopped asking, what do I actually want here? You started asking, what will keep this peaceful? And you stopped noticing the difference between the two questions. Maybe you are 63 years old and you only just noticed this year how long you've been managing everyone's comfort but your own. Maybe you are 52 or 70 or somewhere in between, and the pattern has quietly run for decades, dressed up as kindness the entire time. This is happening to you right now in some specific corner of your life, and you may not have named it yet, not clearly, not out loud. Maybe it is a parent who only softens toward you when you agree with them. Maybe it is a friend who calls you selfish the exact moment you stop being convenient. Maybe it is your own reflection in a mirror you do not fully recognize anymore, because she has been performing calm for so long she genuinely forgot she was performing. This is not weakness, and it was never supposed to stay this way forever. This is the beginning of something Jung considered one of the most difficult, most necessary processes a human being can go through. He called it individuation, becoming, in practice, the specific person you actually are, instead of the general performance you were trained to give. And here is the part almost nobody prepares you for. It starts exactly where it hurts the most, in the moment someone quietly casts you as the villain for finally telling the truth. Let's go back to that room. The one where you said no and something in the air shifted before anyone even said a word. What happened in that moment was not really about you at all. It was about a story breaking, a story that had nothing to do with who you actually are. For years, the people around you had not built a relationship with your actual self. They had built a relationship with the role you performed for them, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who always, eventually, says yes. Psychologically, this means they were never loving a whole, complicated, contradictory person. They were loving a function, a service you provided so reliably that no one thought to ask if it cost you anything. Think of it like a chair everyone assumes will always hold their weight, until the day it doesn't, and suddenly the chair is the problem, not the years of weight it quietly carried. Nobody thanks the chair for years of holding steady. They only notice it the day it finally, understandably, gives out. And a function that stops functioning does not read to them as growth. It reads as betrayal. This is why the reaction to your very first real boundary is almost never proportional to what you actually did. You say one plain sentence, I can't keep doing that, and somehow it becomes, I don't even know who you are anymore. Of course they don't know who you are. They never met the version of you that exists underneath the performance. They only ever met the performance, and the performance was very, very good. Watch closely how this plays out, because it repeats itself in almost identical form across thousands of lives. Think of the coworker who always covers the extra shift, the one everyone quietly assumes will say yes because she always has, every single time for years. The first time she says, I can't this week, nobody asks if she's alright. They ask what happened to her, as if her exhausted honesty were somehow less acceptable than her tired yes had always been. Or think of the son who spent 30 years being the reliable one, the one who never argued with his father, the one who quietly absorbed every sharp comment at every holiday dinner without a single word back. The first time he calmly disagrees out loud at the same table, his father does not hear an opinion. He hears an ambush. Or the 74-year-old woman who spent decades being the one everyone called first with bad news, because she always knew what to say, always had the steady voice, always managed to make everyone else feel better before she'd even processed it herself. The year she finally says, "I can't be the strong one this time, I need someone to hold this with me," the silence on the other end of the phone lasts just a little too long. Not because they don't love her. Because they've never once had to. A woman spends 15 years being the one who smooths things over at every family gathering, translating tension between siblings, absorbing blame that was never hers to carry, laughing at jokes that quietly cost her something each time. The day she finally stops, someone in that family says, gently, almost sadly, "You've changed. You used to be so easy to be around." Sit with that sentence for a second, because it is not really an insult. It's a confession. It admits, without meaning to, that easy was the actual point all along. Not authentic. Not honest. Not even particularly happy. Easy. And here is the detail that stings the most once you finally see it clearly. The anger you are facing right now is rarely about the specific thing you refuse to do. Underneath the anger, almost every time, is grief. They are grieving a person who never fully existed in the first place. The idealized version of you they quietly built in their own mind, the one who would always be available, always agreeable, always there to catch whatever they happen to drop. Think of a parent who spent decades introducing their child by a string of achievements instead of a name, the one who got the scholarship, the one who never caused trouble, the one who always made them proud at family gatherings. When that child finally says quietly, "I need you to just ask how I'm actually doing," something in the parent genuinely grieves. Not the child in front of them. The trophy that child was supposed to keep being forever. You are not killing that person by setting a boundary. She was never real to begin with, no matter how convincingly you played her. But knowing this in your head and actually living it in your body are two entirely different things, and the gap between them is where the next part of this begins. Because before you can stop performing for other people, you first have to catch yourself performing for an audience of one, yourself, alone, in rooms where no one else is even watching. This is where the pattern gets uncomfortable, because the mask was never only for them. Somewhere along the way, you built a second, private layer of control that almost no one around you ever sees. A constant internal monitoring system, checking every sentence before it fully leaves your mouth, adjusting your tone in advance, before the other person has even had a chance to react. Not because they explicitly demanded this level of vigilance from you. Because some old, quiet part of you became genuinely terrified of what might happen if you didn't manage it first. This is the part of the pattern that lives entirely inside you, invisible to everyone else in the room. Think of the version of you standing in a kitchen the night before a difficult conversation, running it in your head for the fourth time, adjusting one word, then another, trying to find the exact phrasing that could not possibly upset anyone. That kitchen scene has probably repeated itself hundreds of times across your life, in different rooms, over different subjects, always with the same quiet goal. Make it smaller, make it safer, make it survivable for everyone but you. You rehearse conversations before they happen, softening every sentence 3 or 4 times in your head before you ever say it out loud. You apologize for things that were never actually wrong, purely to release tension in a room before it has the chance to build. You feel a small flicker of real anger, and instead of naming it, even quietly, even just to yourself, you swallow it, smile, and privately call that smile being mature about it. This is not peace, no matter how peaceful it looks from the outside. This is unpaid labor, performed on a shift that never officially ends. Think about how much of your actual mental energy on an ordinary Tuesday goes toward anticipating other people's reactions before they've even had one. You walk into a room and, without deciding to, you scan it. Who seems tense, who might need managing, what topic should quietly stay off the table tonight. That scanning is not intuition. That scanning is a job. And like any unpaid job, it eventually produces the specific exhaustion of someone who is always working and never actually resting, even when her body is technically still. You have effectively been working a second job your entire adult life, and the job was managing everyone else's comfort at your own steady, invisible expense. And here is the cruelest detail in the whole arrangement. Nobody assigned you that job. You appointed yourself to it quietly, probably very young, probably because somewhere back then, keeping the peace felt measurably safer than simply being yourself out loud. Jung would describe this exact moment as the point where the mask stops being a useful tool and quietly becomes a kind of prison. The moment maintaining it starts costing you more than dropping it ever could. You already know this feeling even if you have never put a name on it before today. It is the exhaustion that has nothing to do with your actual schedule and everything to do with performing a version of calm you do not genuinely feel. That exhaustion is not random and it is not a personal weakness. It is the sound of your real self, quietly, insistently knocking, asking to finally be let back in. You know this feeling from ordinary moments too, not just the dramatic ones. The tightness in your chest right before you say something true, followed almost every time by a strange, unfamiliar lightness once the words are actually out. That lightness is not relief that nothing bad happened. That lightness is what it feels like to briefly stop performing. Now watch what happens on the outside once you actually stop managing it, once the internal monitoring finally goes quiet for the first time. Their reaction, in this moment, tells you almost everything you need to know about what the relationship actually was underneath the surface. Watch closely here because this is exactly where people reveal the truth without ever meaning to. Notice the reaction of someone who has depended on the old version of you, the one who never pushed back. This is the exact moment to watch because it will tell you, more clearly than any conversation ever could, what kind of relationship you were actually standing inside of all along. Some go quiet, confused, visibly unsure how to relate to a version of you they have never once had to negotiate with before. You can watch it happen almost in real time, the small pause before they answer, the careful, testing tone, as if they're meeting you for the first time and aren't sure yet what the new rules are. Some escalate instead, accusing you of being cold, distant, not yourself, as if the self they personally preferred was the only real one that ever existed. Some pull back sharply, defensive, repeating the word selfish, like it settles something because naming your honesty as a flaw is easier than examining their own expectations. This reaction is not proof that you did something wrong. It is data, plain and simple, about exactly how much of the relationship depended on your silence to keep functioning. Every connection that quietly required your disappearance in order to feel comfortable will register the end of that disappearance as a genuine loss. That discomfort in them is not a signal that you should go back to managing it. That discomfort is confirmation of what the relationship actually needed from you in order to survive in its old form. There is a specific psychological name for what happens when someone reacts sharply to another person's simple honesty. Jung called it projection, the process where people cannot tolerate a feeling or a truth living inside themselves, so instead, without realizing it, they place that feeling onto someone else. The friend who calls you selfish the exact moment you protect your own time is very often someone who has never once given herself permission to protect hers. Watch what she does the next time a different friend sets the exact same boundary with her. She'll likely call it healthy, admirable, even inspiring in someone else on a different day in a different context. The word only turns into an accusation when it's aimed at the one person she quietly expected to never need it. Your boundary is not the actual threat in that exchange. Your boundary is the mirror. It reflects back everything they have never given themselves permission to do, and mirrors are rarely welcomed with gratitude. This is precisely why the accusation so often does not fit the size of what you actually did. You set one calm, reasonable boundary and suddenly you are cold, different, hard to reach lately, words that describe their fear far more accurately than they describe your behavior. Remember this clearly because it will matter later. It was never the relationship that broke when you changed. It was the story someone else was telling about the relationship, a story you happened to be cast in without ever reading the script. That story needed a specific version of you to keep running smoothly, and the moment you stopped supplying it, the story collapsed. Not you. The story. Say that to yourself again, slowly, the next time this comes up because you will need to remember it. That distinction, small as it sounds, is the entire hinge this whole video turns on. If any part of this is already landing for you right now, if a specific face or a specific conversation just surfaced uninvited, stay with that feeling a moment longer because what comes next is the part most people scroll past too quickly, and it is the part that actually changes something. There is a meaningful difference between the mask coming off on your own terms and the mask being torn off against your will. One is chosen, deliberately, slowly, with your hand steady. The other is forced, sudden, and it rarely announces itself with an argument. The version that hurts the most, the version almost nobody warns you about in advance, unfolds in near total silence. Not a confrontation, not a slammed door, just someone quietly stepping back and never fully stepping forward again. Picture it clearly because you may already recognize this exact shape from your own life. Maybe it's a sister who used to text every morning without fail, small things, nothing important, just presence. And now the messages come once a week, polite, brief, carefully neutral, the way you write to someone you're not entirely sure of anymore. Nobody said the relationship changed. Nobody had to. Maybe it's an old friend group that used to include you in every plan without thinking twice, and now, somehow, you're always finding out about the dinner after it already happened. Nobody excluded you on purpose, they'd say if you asked. It just got easier, somewhere along the way, to plan around the version of you that used to go along with everything. A phone that used to buzz constantly with her name, and now sits still for days at a time. A voice on the other end of the line that used to say, "Call me anytime, I mean it," now careful, shorter, oddly formal. You keep checking your phone anyway, some old reflex still expecting the old rhythm to return on its own. It doesn't, and some part of you already knows it won't. No explosion anywhere in sight. No dramatic accusation. Just absence, arriving slowly enough that for a while you keep quietly hoping it is only temporary. This is very often the exact moment the shift stops being theoretical and becomes fully, undeniably real. Because as long as someone stays angry at you, some part of you can still hold on to the hope of fixing it, of explaining yourself clearly enough, of undoing whatever damage you believe you caused. Anger, strangely, still feels like connection. It still means they're in the room with you, even if the room is on fire. Silence removes even that. It doesn't ask you to explain, defend, or apologize. It just stops asking anything of you at all, and that absence is its own kind of answer. But silence does not negotiate with you the way anger does. Silence simply confirms, without a single word, that the relationship was never actually built to survive your honesty. And in that exact moment, something breaks that genuinely needed to break. Not you. The illusion breaks. The old belief that being loved required your ongoing disappearance as the price of admission. You stop waiting for an apology that was never going to arrive. You stop replaying the conversation looking for the sentence you could have softened. You stop asking the silence to explain itself. You start instead standing in it. This is the precise moment the victim in you and the conscious, awake person in you finally meet face to face, in the same silent room, and only one of them is allowed to keep walking forward from here. The version of you that spent years quietly asking, "What did I do wrong this time?" finally, for the first time, asks a completely different question instead. Why did simply being real cost me this much? That question is not bitterness dressed up as insight. It is the first honest thing you've asked yourself in years that wasn't secretly about managing someone else's feelings. That question is the doorway you have been circling for years without realizing it was right there, standing open the entire time, waiting for you to stop apologizing long enough to walk through it. By the way, if any part of this is hitting closer to home than you expected tonight, drop a single word in the comments below, because everything from here forward is where this stops being a wound and quietly starts becoming a foundation. Because here is the part nobody tells you about: the silence, the growing distance, the people who quietly step back and never quite return. It was never punishment, however much it felt like one in the moment. It was the price of a very specific, very particular kind of freedom, and freedom, real freedom, has never once in human history been free. You paid for it in relationships that could only exist on the quiet condition that you stayed small, agreeable, predictable, easy to place. You paid for it in years spent translating your own needs into a language soft enough that no one would ever have to sit with your disappointment, only their own. You paid for it in the comfort of being universally liked, which was never actually comfort at all. It was invisibility, carefully wearing a friendly, familiar face. And in exchange for everything you gave up, you got something back that none of them could have given you, no matter how much they loved the performance. You got your own signature back. The specific, particular, occasionally inconvenient truth of exactly who you are, underneath every single adjustment you ever made for someone else's momentary ease. Nobody hands that back to you. You have to go collect it yourself, one honest sentence at a time, usually in exactly the rooms that trained you to hide it in the first place. Now go back to that room one more time, the one from the very beginning of this video, the one where you said one plain no, and the temperature in the air changed before anyone spoke. Look at it again, slowly, without flinching this time. You are still standing there, fully intact. Nothing about you collapsed in that moment, no matter how it felt at the time. The only thing that actually broke was a story that was never yours to protect in the first place. A story someone else quietly wrote about who you were supposed to be, a part you performed for years without anyone ever once asking if you had agreed to play it. You stopped auditioning. You started arriving. You stopped translating yourself for comfort. You started speaking in your own actual voice. You did not become cruel by refusing to keep performing it. You did not become distant for the sake of being distant, or difficult for the sake of being difficult. You became someone who finally noticed the difference between being loved and being useful, and stopped mistaking the second one for the first. You became someone who no longer confuses peace with your own disappearance. And this is not superiority, no matter how tempting that framing can feel from the outside looking in. This is not proof that you suddenly see more clearly than everyone still comfortably wearing their own mask tonight. That is not superiority, and it was never meant to be worn like one. Some days you will still catch yourself softening a sentence out of pure old habit mid-conversation before you even notice you're doing it. Some days the old guilt will still show up uninvited, sitting quietly in the room like it was never asked to leave. That is not failure, and it does not undo anything you have already changed. That is simply what it looks like to become real slowly, in layers, instead of all at once in one clean dramatic moment. There is no finish line here, no single day you cross over and never look back. There is only slightly more honesty tomorrow than there was yesterday, and that quietly is enough. The part of Jung's work that matters most here is actually simple, once you strip away the jargon around it. The word sounds academic. The feeling underneath it is not. Individuation was never about becoming perfect, flawless, endlessly calm. It is about becoming whole, integrating the parts of yourself you spent years hiding, managing, and quietly apologizing for purely for the sake of being easier to love. You stop performing peace for an audience and you slowly start feeling something closer to the real thing instead. You stop earning belonging one careful adjustment at a time, and you start recognizing that the people who walked away were never truly holding space for the real you to begin with. You stop asking, silently, to be forgiven for simply existing exactly as yourself. You stop rehearsing your own personality before you're allowed to show it. You stop treating your own preferences as something that needs a justification attached before it's allowed into the conversation. You start noticing the specific, quiet relief of saying a true thing out loud and discovering the room did not actually end. You stop translating yourself into something smaller just to be easier to sit across from at dinner. If this found you today, if even one sentence in this video felt like it was written specifically for the exact room you are standing in right now, put the word sovereign in the comments below. Not to prove anything to anyone else watching. Not as a performance for strangers on the internet. You stopped needing them to understand it. You stopped needing anyone's permission to name it. You stopped shrinking the story down to a size that wouldn't unsettle anyone else at the table. You started telling the truth at a normal volume and let whoever needed to leave. Just to quietly mark the moment you stopped negotiating your own existence, and finally started living from the only place that was ever truly yours to begin with.